So we're going to talk a lot about Florida today, a lot of accomplishments that Florida's made. But I'd like to start out with something that's kind of current and relevant. It's natural, I think, for anybody when we face a major crisis or a major threat to feel the need to pump the brakes, to slow things down, and just try to make sure that the basics are covered. I'm sure we've all read stories about school districts that have, and legislatures that have decided to just say, hold on, let's just not do anything with reforms for right now. Let's just focus on the basic needs and get those done. So I'm curious, from each of your various perspectives, how has Florida responded to that question of what to do for students and how much to do? We'll start with you.
Well, I think it's interesting to think about that in the context of the pandemic in particular, right? Because so many people said, "Oh my gosh, we're taking on water," right? People are closing schools, kids aren't learning. We just got to focus on those things. I think we actually had the opposite reaction, which we thought this is the time to step on the gas. Now, part of that could have been because the Capitol was closed and there was no lobbyists in the building, which made it a lot easier to do. But if you think about just what we did this past year in the state of Florida, whether it was massive reforms in early learning, early literacy, massive reforms in workforce education, all of these things happening at the same time. So when kids are not getting the kind of education we expect them to do, I think our thought was, this is our chance to step back and to look about what do we want the system to look like in 20 years, whether there was a pandemic or not, and how would we remake it in a way to make it better than it ever could have been before, now that we have this opportunity to step back. And that's what I think you saw in workforce education. Right now you have 50% of Floridians, all these folks who are losing their jobs or were cut in pay or had some sort of demotion as a result of the pandemic. We said, we've been talking about workforce education for a really long time. Now is the time to remake the entire thing. And by the way, who is going to fight us when we have all these people who are out of work or have been demoted or there's been all this sort of uncertainty in their lives? Bring it on, right? And then the same thing with early childhood education and K-12 and school choice. I think all of those things became more important to us, and I think the idea for us was, let's press the advantage.
Yeah, it's really those moments of crisis that present a lot of opportunities, that you won't get in other times. Absolutely. Right. Senator Stargel?
I agree. I think was it Winston Churchill said, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste."
Sure.
And there was so much uncertainty in so many areas, but I do think it's a little bit to what Amanda said earlier. It also kind of depends on where you were going into this. Florida has kind of pushed the boundaries year over year, and every time we heard that the sky was going to fall and people were going to die and everything was going to crash, and we would do it and things would be okay, and we'd maybe fix a couple tweaky things and we'd move and then we'd fix a couple more things. So when we had this opportunity and there was so much uncertainty, thinking about the scholarships that we did and a lot, the major advances that we made, we didn't know where kids were being educated anywhere. I mean, going into this, Florida, I think, had 60,000 kids, if I remember. We didn't know exactly where they were being educated. This was the time to kind of disrupt the things and figure it out, put them where we can, fund what we can, continue to move the ball down the field, knowing that there's not certainty with anybody on anything. So this was the time to take those risks and then really kind of move that ball forward. And then, we'll work it out at the end. And I think, as it's been shown, it's really been quite successful.
Indeed. Senator Diaz?
So I think that normally we understand that we have a limited time in our positions in the legislature. We have term limits and a 60-day session, by the way, which creates urgency. And during the pandemic, like the speaker said, there were no lobbyists, there was nobody in the building, but we knew that outside of those walls, parents in the communities across the state, probably across the country, were looking at their children getting educated on their dining room table, and they did not like what they were seeing. And it was an opportunity for us to seize that moment and again, push the ball forward down the field. So I think the sense of urgency of knowing that we have a limited time to make an impact, and the fact that you had some of the positives that may have come out of the pandemic is that parents are really paying attention and demanding a better education for their children.
Commissioner Corcoran, you made a lot of decisions about how we would do school in the state of Florida when that pandemic hit. Do you want to talk about some of the things you made happen during that?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. First, when we were trying to reopen schools going back to that August, you got to remember the legislature isn't in session. And we get these first tranche of billions of dollars. And so we started spending it, and this is a good backdrop story. and we're spending it, and we're doing some rulemaking around it, and then I get a call from the Speaker of the House, and he's like, "What are you doing spending all this money? That's the legislature appropriates." And I said, "Speaker, I mean, you guys aren't in session, and we gotta get it out because of the urgency of it all." And he said, "When you were Speaker, you would have never done this." And I said, "It turns out I was wrong." But the real, I mean, you got to give, this is a great function, but we'd be remiss if all of us just didn't pay tremendous homage to Governor Bush. He hates when I do this. I always say that whether it's choice or accountability, he was like a founding father, and he gets mad when I say that. But it's true, and he had like 5 reforms. And I remember when Marco was Speaker and I was his Chief of Staff, we printed out the 5 reforms, gave it to everyone to put in their office. But one of them was, reform is never final. What was it exactly, Governor?
Reform is never final, success is never complete.
Yeah, reform is never final, success is never complete. And to your opening, Lane, even with that just a massive growth that we've had, going from the bottom, literally in the entire country of 50 states, to whatever, 3rd, 4th, 5th, I don't care if it's NAEP or Education Week, whatever, we're at the tops in almost all measures. Our accountability system is, I think, one of the best in the country, if not the best. I think our choice options are the best in the country. But even with all that, if you take, instead of below basic and you take proficient, as a nation, we're below 50% of our students being proficient. I can assure you, you cannot sustain a self-governing society, a constitutional republic, if you produce decade after decade after decade a generation of children who are not proficient or fully literate. And that's where we're at. And so it's not just the pandemic. I think in general, whether there was a pandemic or not a pandemic, the urgent crisis in America, the greatest crisis in America, is us losing from within because we're not educating our children well enough.
Yeah. That's great. I want to actually talk about what you did specifically, though, during that time in terms of, I know charter schools, I guess let me back up a little bit. We did the workforce legislation like Speaker Sprowls talked about. We had movement on private school choice, movement on charter schools. Florida, I think, was one of the only states, or at least the first state, that reopened schools that first new year with the pandemic starting. And I know you were required, I remember it because I had kids at the breakfast table, at the dinner table, doing school from home. I remember you gave everybody the option to have school from like a remote source or go into the physical building. And Willard, I'd like to also hear you. I don't mean to cut you off, but I'd like to hear more about what you have thought Florida did or accomplished during that somewhat traumatic time of a pandemic that really disrupted everything. Like, how do you see the state reacting in that time?
Well, I think I was not concerned about the state reaction because I live in this state and I'm proud of this state, and I knew that they were going to do the right thing. I thought the pandemic presented us with an opportunity to really broaden the right thing. I wrote a position paper, and I thought I'd better write it down because I thought you was going to skip me, and I would not be able to talk. But I got it in writing. It's called #FINRE, Fix It, Not Rearrange It. We now have an opportunity to deal with the realities that were present before the pandemic. We know that before the pandemic, the children that I'm concerned about were behind, which means that they're doubly behind. So it seems to me that we now can fix it, and nobody can call us racist. Nobody can say we're insensitive. We're now responding to the pandemic, but we're broadening our response, and we're going to make sure that as we come out of the pandemic, we're going to make sure that all the children in the state of Florida are reading on the grade level, that all of the children in the state of Florida have what they need in order to come out of the pandemic. So I'm saying fix it, don't rearrange it. Let's admit what's broken before the pandemic, and let's fix that as we respond to the pandemic. Let's not be afraid to be bold and brazen about our response. Don't worry about being called a racist. You're not a racist until I call you one. And then, so if I don't call you one, you're in good shape. So let's fix it, not rearrange it. Jeb, I hope you put this on your website because I want everybody to read it. It is too long for me to try to present it to you, but I outlined what's broken before the pandemic and what must be fixed coming out of the pandemic. Fix it, not rearrange it.
Thank you. Yes. I'm actually curious if you dare tell the truth about how you feel about what all these leaders had done in their positions. Did they fix during this last couple of years, or did they rearrange?
You can't fix what you don't know what's broken. All right? We have to once again say as a community that this is really broken. I can't condemn you about doing what I want you to do unless I dare bring to your attention what I want you to do. So if you're not doing what I think you ought to do, then it's my responsibility to bring it to you. That's why I'm on this panel, so they won't be able to say, I didn't know.
I love it. I love the accountability here. So I'm gonna jump back over to Speaker Sprowls here to talk about, you talked about the workforce. You talked about it a little bit just now. You talked about it yesterday in your opening introduction remarks. For those that maybe don't know the depth and breadth of it, why is it such a big deal? I mean, some people have called it, I think, the most comprehensive, I gotta get the language, the most comprehensive K-12 post-secondary and workforce legislation in the country. That's a pretty bold claim. Do you agree? First of all, I'm sure you do.
That was,
but why? But
that
why?
was Chris who said that.
I thought it was Patricia, but
We'll go with Patricia.
but tell us, why was that legislation so important? Why was it such a big deal?
It's like, the GOAT of workforce legislation, Patricia. It's a big deal because, to his point about being honest, right? Being honest about what's broken.
Please.
Even when we're doing really well, right? We'll all the politicians will all get together and be like, unemployment's amazing. By the way, the unemployment rate in Florida is below the national average. We're super proud of it. It's not that we're not proud of it. But we also realize that even unemployment numbers only measure people who are actually looking for a job. There are hundreds of thousands of Americans, particularly able-bodied men in this country, who can work but aren't looking. And regardless of that reason, whether it's because they're discouraged, because they were in an industry and their job was lost and they haven't recalibrated and got a certification to lift themselves up and to go in another field, whatever it is, we have to realize that there is a massive amount underneath the surface that is broken. And that people who are in a job and think that they could do better for their families, it's hard. You're sitting at home and you get up on your computer, right? Well, that's what we all do to solve problems now, right? It's like, oh, I'll just Google it and it'll solve it for me. But I go on there because I want to find, okay, well, what job should I be looking for? What kind of training should I get? And I think one thing that we've had to acknowledge over the last year or so is that we have everybody doing a little bit of workforce, right? Department of Children and Family, the Department of Education, the Department of Economic Opportunity, or the Department of Commerce in other states. Everybody's doing it, so nobody might as well be doing it, right? Because if I'm trying to find the right front door to get in, I couldn't do that. So what the bill did is basically say, look, no matter how you come in, you're all going to end up in the same place. And then once we have you, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you down to the zip code of where you live, what opportunities you have to, in your community that are going to be specific and economic driven. Then we're going to tell you how to get qualified for those jobs. And we're going to provide, virtual career counseling. And then if it's a state college you're going to go to, we're going to do something that the private sector does all the time, but that government never does. And we're going to say, if you go and you get one of these nationally recognized industry certifications, we are going to give you a money-back guarantee that within 6 months, if you do not have a job, government will give you your money back because we shouldn't have taken it from you to begin with. And then we're going to change the incentive structures, right? This is the other thing that we have to own, right? You got to be honest about it. What we have to own is we create the incentive structure. So if we've created the wrong carrots in the system, and don't reward people for bringing people into businesses or jobs or education where they can get a job, then we failed. So we went into higher education and we said, okay, now these are the incentives. This is what you have to do. Drive kids into STEM because those are the demand fields that we have in the state of Florida, and then build opportunities around that. And then the last thing I'll say, because this is a Governor Bush, you measure what you care about, right? So if we're not measuring it, it's because we don't, it might be broken. We just don't want anyone to know. So we said, hey, we're going to start measuring. We called it the Sail to 60 program because we want by 2030 to have 60% of our able-bodied adults in their state of Florida that have somewhere between a nationally recognized industry certification and a higher education degree. Get them ready for the workforce. Find the people who can work but have been out. Get them back in. Provide scholarships for them if they've been out of higher education for a period of time to get them back in. And then once they get there, train them. Guarantee that if they don't get a job in 6 months, we'll own it.
Yeah, so this is what we mean by comprehensive, I guess, right? So we go from making sure all the different agencies that are working on this issue, on workforce issues, that they have some kind of conductor that's leading the music. And then you've got ways to connect to the actual people that need the jobs and the jobs that need the people. You make those connections happen, and then you measure how you're doing, right? So I guess my question then is, for other policymakers that have tried to do similar workforce, or maybe not similar, but try to do some type of workforce legislation in their state, try to connect the needs of employers and the skills and the jobs that are out there to like the skills that people have and can contribute. What advice would you give them? Like, what are the hurdles or challenges that might make people stumble or might get things to halt during the process?
I'll frame it in the positive, right? The opportunity here is this topic is very complicated and complex, and most people, maybe because of my answer, most people's eyes glaze over, which I think is positive for you all, right? I walked out into a press gaggle after we passed House Bill 1507, which is the workforce bill. We had blueprints up. We were trying to explain it. We had everything up there. It's a 100-some page bill. I didn't get a single question from the press about the bill. At the end of it, I said, hey, if anybody can ask me a question that says that that shows that they've actually read the bill at all, I'll give you an interview, exclusive interview on any topic you want. Nobody got the win because nobody had read the thing. So I think from a lawmaker, policymaker's perspective, this is a huge opportunity for states to be as bold as you absolutely want to be, because nobody's going to read the thing anyway, except for you. And it will have a massive impact on people's lives.
Yes.
I just think also, go to www.willtoachieve.org. www.willtoachieve.org. I applaud the creation of job opportunities. It's based on the premise that the reason why conditions are in my community is because we don't have access to job opportunities. The big problem for me in Liberty City is not access to job opportunities, but a belief that I can achieve. So there has to be a counter campaign as you pass all of this legislation sincerely. Yeah. Somebody has got to convince the people who are on welfare, who are third generations of welfare recipients, that they can achieve. If I don't do that, then you've passed the laws. And people say, well, y'all just didn't do anything anyway. You did what you're supposed to do. Charge me to do what I'm supposed to do.
Is that need to help people believe that they can achieve, is that like limited to the workforce legislation, or who are the other players?
I think that's us in the community. I think that's organizations like the Urban League, the NAACP. I think that's us who believe that employment is the pathway out. But in my community, I don't believe in working. So until I convince you that you have to work, you can have all of the great job training programs in the world. So there has to be a counter campaign so that my community believes that this is real, that if I do this, I can become somebody.
Yeah, it sounds like, to me, there's an opportunity here for people like in your position, legislators, lawmakers, to work with communities.
Absolutely. If we don't do that
campaign together,
then we would have passed great laws, and then you will be disappointed. You said I did everything I was supposed to do, and there's no change. I'm saying that if you don't do it with me, there won't be lasting real change.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to Senator Diaz here. And forgive me, I have to actually read all of this part because it's a lot. Florida has nearly 700 charter schools, serving more than 340,000 students. And since you've been in office, Senator Diaz, the state has committed dedicated capital outlay funding to charter schools, given fast passes for opening to high-performing in-state charter schools, recruited high-impact providers to come to the state through Schools of Hope, and required districts to share proceeds from any locally approved tax levies with charters. So my question, I guess, is, do you like charter schools?
I would say yes. I think it's an important part of our ecosystem in Florida. And I think the biggest message that we can take from this is just because, and you read that list, and sometimes we pass things and then we move on to the next thing because we don't have the time to look back and worry about that in that window. We have to go and move forward and hope that our commissioner can implement those things that we've passed. So I think I think what happens there is you read off that list of achievements, but when I go and look at national publications or organizations that rate charter school policy, and when I look at Florida, and we are by most measures, or when you have conversations, supposed to be leading, there's always still things left to be done. And I think the most important thing is not to sit around and wait and see how things work out, is to move to the next step. And that's exactly what we did. We passed legislation that created alternate authorizers using our state colleges and universities. While not perfect, and I still sitting here think, and I hope that my colleagues will help, think that we need to go further in that endeavor. But it keeps moving the ball down the field. If the best defense is to play offense, and I think when you're moving down the ball down the field, you're improving. And we don't ever want to hear that another state is doing better than us in charters or choice or anything else. So we always have to be moving the ball down the field.
Yeah, I think you need to watch out for Kentucky. I was talking to a couple of the Kentucky guys, and they're trying to come up, I think. But your comment about how we never want to. We always want to keep going to the next thing, right? You pass the legislation and then you move on to the next thing. This idea of continual progress makes me wonder, and this is a question really for all of you, I'd like to hear all of your opinions on this, is do people ever get tired, or do you ever get like resistance from people saying like, man, didn't we do enough already like the last 10 years or whatever? Like, because Florida really has year after year after year passed so much legislation, passed so many bills and laws to try to get kids in a better position in their education system. But it makes me wonder if some people get fatigued out of that. Do you hear that, and how do you?
So I will tell you that, funny enough, Senator Stargel and I have had this conversation several times, and what we believe is that it is our job to communicate to our colleagues why it is important and why what we did last year or the year before that was great, but that these challenges are in front of us, and we need to keep that work going. As you mentioned, 700 charter schools in Florida. Those are in certain counties, and we still have growth that needs to happen in other counties, because it's important for all of our students across the state to have access to a high quality school, and that whether it be the district school, magnet school, a charter school, or a private school through our scholarship programs. We have to continue to do this work, and the only way we can do that is by inspiring our colleagues to continue marching forward.
Anybody else want to jump in on that question?
Well, and I want to jump on that somewhat too. The other thing that's been important, back to what T. Willard was saying, is the choice and the options. When you want someone to be bought into something, you have to give them option. If I told you you had to shop only at one store always, you wouldn't be very thrilled no matter what the selection was. So
Unless
that's why we
Target.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just kidding.
So that's why we keep moving the ball down that field, so that people have more options. Every year we're always working around it this way or that way, or tweaking it, or providing this next scholarship, or trying to fix this next loophole. And in charter world, we just did it. We went in, we did charter, we've come back, we've fixed. Every year it's whack-a-mole. It's another person trying to push against not doing these reforms because they want to do things the way they've always done it. And if you get into the position where we're always doing it the way you've always done it, you're not looking for innovation, you're not keeping with the times, you're not being creative, you're not being interesting. So we're always kind of pushing that ball. It is hard, it's challenging. I would say the educators in the state of Florida have done a phenomenal job of moving along with all of this. You see teachers of the year all the time who rise up, who they've done innovations in their class, but you've got to keep moving or you're going to get stale. And our kids, how they learn today is very different than how I learned, and even how some of you guys, even learned. It's a different day.
Yeah, okay, I see T. Willard jump in, and then a couple others. Go ahead.
Jeb Bush and I founded the first charter school in the state of Florida. He came to me after having been defeated in an election. He said that, I want to start a charter school. And I said, let's do it. We started the first charter school. The issue is not choice for me. I wanted to start the charter school to demonstrate that black children can learn. That's my choice, that black children can learn. So we have to keep focused that the outcome that we want may not be the outcome that you want, but the outcome that we want is that all children succeed. And the charter school gives us that opportunity. When we look at our village, I'm challenging my superintendent that if KIP can take the children that left the ill-performing school in Liberty City, and now they are performing above and beyond the call of duty, something is broken over there, not over here. So let's fix what's broken also in the public schools where the children don't have access to choice. Let's not just celebrate choice. Let's celebrate what choice has demonstrated that can be done. And then let's look back and say to those school districts that are not performing that we expect you to do the same thing that choice has been done.
I think a couple others we're going to jump in on the question of like, do people get tired of doing reform year after year, and how do you address that if they do?
Yeah. That's tough to follow, but I think that, I served under a speaker who said, when we were setting the agenda and it was going to be heavy education, centric, said, if I could wave a magic wand and do one thing, it would be that every child will grow up with two parents who love them. They grow up in a loving home. But I don't have that magic wand and I can't do that thing. But what I can do is make sure that every child, regardless of what neighborhood they grow up in, who their parents are, what they do for a living, has an opportunity for a world-class education. That we have an opportunity to give them something that they might not have had otherwise. And with that fight, how could you ever get fatigue? That speaker was Richard Corcoran, by the way. Richard was the speaker. So what I would say to your lawmakers back home is like, listen, when we get fatigue, it's not from the kids. The kids are not giving us fatigue. It's the adults who are giving us fatigue, right? It's the constant barrage of things that have to do with systems and bureaucracies and not to do with kids and opportunity. I don't think I've ever met anyone who said, all of this giving kids the opportunity to go to schools and see them excel, gosh, I'm just so tired of it. Like that never happens. We get worn down by the adults. So what I would say is that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we realize and continuously check the fact that we're going to push again and again and again and again, and we're not going to stop because the adults don't want us to, because the kids do.
Yes.
Legislators also get worn down when they sincerely do the right thing and they don't get desired results. That's really fatigue. That's what makes you frustrated.
Yeah.
Is that from the bottom of my heart, I believe that if I pass this law, things are going to be different. And when that does not happen, you say, the hell with it, I'm tired. And that doesn't happen because the laws normally come top down instead of bottom up. So it seems to me that as you pass a law, you need to make sure that there's a Willard Fair someplace saying, bottom up. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that the law that you pass gets absorbed by the people that you passed it for.
Yeah, it should be a lesson. If the laws that are passed are not getting the results that we hope for, and it's true, we need to give those laws some time, right? But if they're not getting the results, that should be a lesson to go back and change it.
It won't happen because there's a good law.
Go ahead.
It happens because there's a good effort to make the law into reality.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I actually did not hear you. Could you say that again?
It won't happen because it's a good law. The laws are good.
Right.
But there has to be an effort to translate the law into reality. And if that does not happen, then eventually you say, I tried. What else can I do?
Right, but that
fault.
effort needs to be more inclusive than
Absolutely.
It sometimes is. And I think that's
Absolutely.
the lesson, that if it's not working, figure out why it's not working and then go back and do it the right way, and being inclusive.
If it's not working, it's not your fault in many times. It's my fault. Because you passed the law and I don't do what I'm supposed to do to make sure that we take advantage of the law. We spend all our time passing the law. And when the law is passed, we go on to something else. Implementation is the key to success after we pass the law.
I think a key element there is, and I think, we're lucky in Florida to have this, but, we go into session, we pass all this great legislation, we leave, hooray. But then who implements that? And I think the benefit we have right now is to have a great reformer sitting in the commissioner's chair where he can actually go ahead and implement these things and have the same vision. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have somebody who's sitting there that just wants the status quo and doesn't want to disrupt, doesn't want to have, he doesn't like to argue with school districts, I understand that, but it's...
Shouldn't have to do that. I'll go for him. See, he shouldn't have to do that. If it comes local, then he should be able to pick up the phone and say, T. Willard, you need to talk to Alberto. T. Willard, you need to talk to the chairman of the school board. There's no partnership in the implementation of the law. And when you continue to do what you think you have to do because you believe that it's the right thing, and you don't get the results that you want, you simply say, the hell with it.
Yeah.
I feel like I should say that most people always say, like, why did you open up schools? Why did you open up schools? Because it was going to be a big fight. And the simple answer is I have 6 children.
Motivated, right?
Oh, yeah, well, let's talk about that a little more. I remember when that decision was made, and for my family, it was a choice. We thought about it, and we ended up keeping our kids home. We thought we'd try that out. And it was interesting because it revealed a lot about things that I just didn't know that were happening within my school that I could now see. I don't know if anybody else has this experience with their kids, but every time my kids come home from school and I ask them what they did, or like how their day was, or what they learned, I get like nothing from them. It's like good, recess or whatever, right? So like it's a struggle to really know like how, from a parent's perspective, how our schools are doing and what they're doing with our kids. So that was insightful for me. But I'm curious, from a statewide perspective, when you made that call to require in-person learning options, make those available, along with the remote learning options. Did Florida learn anything from that? How did that go?
Well, I think leadership's everything. If you have great leaders, and that's like General McChrystal wrote a book, and he said, I can take my top 10 colonels and rank them 1 to 10. And number 1, I could switch with number 10, 1 being the best, 10 being the worst, and switch them with their units. And in 30 days, the 10th unit is number 1 and the first unit's number 10. And I think we've been blessed with great leadership with Governor DeSantis. It wasn't an easy decision, but what we did under the governor's leadership, I remember the pandemic when it became a reality for us was in late February. And I was like starting to think, okay, this might go south fast, getting on the phone with the virtual school. Can you do virtual education for all 3 million give or take students, or 3.5 if you want to start private schools? But what we did under the governor's leadership was we tracked data. I was on the phone with epidemiologists from Sweden, Israel. Anywhere we heard something, we tracked it down. And what became readily, factually, scientifically known was not having kids in school and the ramifications that come with that were staggering and real and certain versus putting the kids back in school and the risks of COVID to them. And so that's why we, after all of that data and all that science, we said we're putting the kids back in school, because still to this day, face-to-face instruction with that great teacher standing in front of that child and they're interacting with their peers and is the best form of education you can deliver. And what happened, even during those times, study after study would start coming out. I remember JAMA came out, and you guys might remember it, but they were saying that just from the first year of lost learning, that it was 25 million days of lost life for children worldwide. I think it was like 15 million or 14 million for the state of Florida. And that was just the first year. So if you doubled it and said now we're at 30 in Florida, in the country, we're at somewhere between 30 and 40 million days of lost life. Because what they did is they took, what does education mean to the outcome of a person's life, health, well-being, occupation, and with the denial of that education, how many days of lost life would you have? And that's what they came up with. And our suicides rate went up, our drug overdose rate went up. Everything that was certain in this category, and yet I think we still, one is too many, but we had less children die from COVID than we did from the seasonal flu the year before. And almost all of those deaths, all but one, I think, of the deaths, and when I say all, I think it was somewhere between, around 8. All of those deaths happened when kids weren't in school. They were in the summer, they were at Christmas break. School provides structure, it provides, accountability, and those kids are getting the guidance and getting the accountability and getting that structure, while also getting the thing that matters most is that education that gives them what nothing else we do can do at that level, and that is dignity, human dignity. What is that worth?
Well, I appreciated the fact that, I appreciate the data, first of all, that you've just explained that shows that in-school learning matters and it makes a difference for kids. But I also know that different families have different situations and different children do better in different options. So for some families, being home may have been a better option, even if it was challenging for parents to have to now juggle kids being at home and being home all the time in the same, maybe your house is small like mine. But the thing that it comes down to for me is that you let people have a choice. Even in that kind of small sphere, people could choose to come if they wanted to, if they felt like that was a good option for them, or they could stay home and do the remote learning. So I appreciated that. And speaking of choice, I wanted to go to Senator Stargel for just a second and talk about some of the private school choice expansion that you worked on over this past, I think just past year, right? Tell us a little more about that.
We've been working on it for the last few years as far as we have a litany from Opportunity Scholarships, Hope Scholarship, McKay Scholarship, Gardner Scholarship. We've been doing things through the years. Again, trying to figure out the way that we could do it in a way that would be something we could plan for. And a lot of your limitations were always budget. It was, we had to be able to know where this child was funded and whether or not we could afford it. And so when we got in there this year, back to what I'd said earlier, we didn't know where a lot of kids were being educated. We didn't know if they were staying at home, if they were not at school. So many kids just we didn't know where they were. They hadn't enrolled in school. We don't think they'd left the state. So I thought, this is the year. This is the year to come all in and to remove that prior public requirement, and which was done basically for forecasting and for budgeting, to be honest. These are low-income kids who have never been in the public school system, who parents have made a sacrifice, if it's a teacher and a fireman or whatever, to send their child to a private school because they felt that was the best option. And I want to say that I don't think, when you have choice, it doesn't mean that the public school choice is not a good choice. I have 5 children. We have done public school, private school, charter school, homeschool. We've done it with different kids at different times. I had one year where I had one in a charter school, one in a magnet school, one that was at home, and one that had left for college. We've done them all at various different times because our children are different. So because our children are different, you've got to have options that meet those children. That's the reason we all do this. We're not doing this for us, for the systems, for the teachers. We're doing it for the children to have the best opportunity to get educated in the environment that works best for them. And that's what... And so when each time you hit someone's little area, they tend to push back. Well, this was a budget area, and I happen to be the budget chair, and we have great partners who've been these reforms in the House, and we said, you know what, this is the year. We're going to go ahead and just rip that Band-Aid off, get rid of the prior public, and allow kids to be educated in the place that works best for them. And if that's a private school option, they now have that opportunity.
Yeah. You've all talked about various things that you've done over the course of the last year or few years. My question is about kind of going back to this idea of continuing to push forward year after year. When do we get to the point that we're good? And I know the easy answer here is, well, when every kid is whatever, but I want real answers as legislators in a real state with real people and children. What is the actual point where, how much choice do we go to? How many charter schools or how many private school options do we need? Where is the limit? Do you see a limit, or what is that for you? All of you, any of you?
I just spoke, but I'm going to jump in. We're all parents up here. Tell me the point with your child where you're like, you know what, we're good. I'm done raising them. Hopefully maybe mid-30s that may happen, I guess. I don't know. But you're never good. You always want more. You're always going to push for the next thing. The biggest challenge is to make sure that when you're pushing for this kid to have every opportunity, you're not leaving all these kids behind. And so that's what we've tried to do with some of these opportunities. And not to go back to the private school choice. Private school choice has always been an opportunity typically for the rich kid. Now this is an opportunity for any kid. And I think that's huge because every child now has those opportunities to find that best place to be educated. You don't stop. You don't say, okay, we're good, we've had enough. Hopefully, reform is never final. We're going to continue to do this, and we're going to continue to make sure that we're always pushing that bar.
I think if you start with the premise that this is not about the collective, this is about every individual child, and in a state that is 21 million people and continuing to grow, we're not going to reach the point where we have met the needs of every individual child in every individual situation. That's why we have to continue to fight. That's why we have to continue to challenge each other, to not get fatigued, to move forward, and not allow the detractors to say enough is enough. And at the same time, continuing to break the status quo, because the status quo will evolve to try to challenge and figure out a way around the legislation that we pass. So you continually have to evolve, and at the end of the day, if we're student-centered, the individual student, you're never going to meet that. So you have to continue to evolve.
Yeah, this is like, I saw a YouTube video on game theory. That's all I know is the YouTube video. But the idea was there are no, like in what do they call them? Eternal games or like infinite games or something like that. That there are no permanent like losses or defeats or wins. Like as long as your opponent, if you want to call them opponents, still has the time and energy and the willpower to stay in the fight, the game, it never ends. And so I think that's probably fair to say of many things in government, that there's always going to be somebody that is pushing and on another side that is pushing against. And so, yeah, it makes sense that there would be never a time to stop. Anybody else have an opinion on that?
I'll say that I do think there is a definite win. I do think there's one thing that we should be focused on. Education's holistic. You have to, focus on all things at all times. And Chris knows where I'm going with this. I've talked to him. We've had this conversation 1,000 times. But and with all the other states here, I'll tell you what our philosophy is and what we're doing. I see a bunch of our guys over here. Is we're going all in on birth to third grade. And the reason is because we've started to look at those stats. And once we lose a child in third grade, you lose that child virtually forever. And so we have, he's called a psychometrician. That means he gives me a lot of data. But since the governor did all the reforms, now we have, decades of reform data. So I said, I want to know every single third grade class that entered third grade, took the FSA, FCAT, whatever it was at the time, and what they were in 10th grade. So if they were a 1 and 2, which was basically functionally, partially, or fully illiterate, what were they in 10th grade? After, there you go, another 7 great years of interventions, reform, everything you could possibly believe, alternative schools, choice. What were they in 10th grade? 86% were still 1s and 2s. The converse is true. I said, okay, the 3, 4s, and 5s, where were they? 83% were 3, 4s, and 5s. And then you can even go back to our kindergarten readiness started under Governor Bush. What were the kindergarten readiness scores? They almost tracked the third grade scores. 42% last time we measured were not kindergarten ready. And so if you don't, and then now just like we have in the NFL, and we can do all the brain scans, now we're doing it with kids, and we can see how they're learning, what's the way that they're learning to read, what part of their brains are activated, how much of their brain is developed at what age. Their brains are pretty much 80% developed by 3 years old. And if you don't go after those children with everything you have by third grade, what's the most dangerous person in the history of mankind? Someone with zero hope. And we're basically, I could write a letter, Dear Mrs. Jones, loved having Johnny, great child, fantastic kid, but he's a 1 or a 2, and his life is pretty much done. It's going to be miserable or substandard the rest of his life. And we're the richest country in the history of mankind. It's shocking, and it's inexcusable. And even with the amazing reform that catapulted us into the top, Massachusetts is normally, tops in reading on the NAEP exam. They're at 45% proficient. 60-some% of our kids, give or take, are being failed by that 3rd and 4th grade period. And if you can't change that, that changes everything in the world. If we could have 90% literacy, 95% literacy by 3rd grade, I can tell you we can pretty much close down DJJ. Department of Corrections is going to empty. We have over 100,000 people incarcerated in the state of Florida. That would drop in half. Social welfare programs would be mitigated. Our tax revenues would go through the roof that could pay for everything everyone else cares about, whether it's the environment or what else. But you cannot lose kids by 3rd grade. And if we continue to do so, and honestly, I mean, these guys have been fantastic. Just in the last 2 years, this legislature, and I'll give the speaker credit, 61%. And that's the thing. If you look at the 3rd grade reading scores, to your point, Mr. Fair, if you look at those 3rd grade reading scores, it's pretty much 100% is low income. Of those low-income kids, a majority are minority. Of those majority of the minority kids, a majority are African American. We know where we got to go and what we have to do.
What you got to do, though, is figure out how to get him there. I got an adopted class. His name is Boo Boo. He's in the 3rd grade when I met him. The year before, he was in the principal's office every day. Not one day, every day. He became a student. He said, Mr. Fair, this is the first time I made 100. And then he outperformed every 3rd grader in the 4th largest school district in the world. How did we get him there? Because children don't learn when somebody is ready to teach. Children learn when the teacher is concerned. So if we don't have teachers in the classroom who fully understand where he is coming from, then he never gets there. Every Monday morning, I go to my school. We call it Reach and Teach, because I know that we let him go at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock on Friday. And since Friday, he's been in a hell zone. He's seen 2 drive-by shootings. He's seen his mama get beat up. He's been able to watch all the television he wants to watch. He's been able to go where he wants to go when he wants to go. And then you expect when the bell rings at 7 o'clock in the morning for him to say, I'm ready to be taught. It don't work that way. So we've got to make sure that we understand what the community has to do, what the parents have to do, what the church has to do in order to make sure that we maximize that law that you pass. You pass the law, but you don't involve me in the actualization of it. And that's the beginning of the process. So going forward, I want you to raise your right hand and say that you're not going to pass any more laws that affect my children unless you involve me in its implementation.
Yeah. Which is a great point, and what I was about to get with Chris. So, 61% of those low-income kids don't have a single book in their entire house.
Amen. And you're talking about closing the achievement gap by reading.
Absolutely.
And they don't read.
And it's even, so we rewrote our whole standards, and we basically said we will not accept any textbook in our classrooms that doesn't have 100% the science of reading. We went from whole language, thank you, Governor, that was another one of your moving away from whole language. But now we have they'll call it, blended or balanced literacy, which is basically still whole language with a little bit of phonics and phonemic awareness. But even if you have that, this is what it's called, the New Worlds Initiative. Even if you have that, if I said to you right now, and anyone in this room, and Fordham's done some great studies on this stuff, how do you pronounce G-H-O-T-I? Most of you would say Godi. And then I'd say, okay, what is Godi? It's a made-up word. So even after you have those young children and you've taught them how to decode, and they got their phonics and phonemic awareness, if they don't have the vocabulary, they're reading nothing. They don't even understand. You're never going to get to comprehension. And so Chris has now, we are, thanks to you guys, mailing out a book starting in January, a month to these low-income targeted kids who need help. And it's, to your point, talk about involving, it's not just that, it's also getting wraparound services with the parents to help them know what they need to do to help that child be able to read and have comprehension. It's a fantastic
And what the entire
program.
community needs to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the children don't only have communications with the parents. Yeah. In fact, in many instances, the parents are not the greatest influences of the children's behavior. So that's why it's important for us to partnership in the implementation of the law, so that those of us who are on the ground can reach out in the right directions. You can send a book to a parent in Liberty City all day long. If it ain't sexy, I might not read it.
Yeah. That's why we're making it sexy, Mr. Fair.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of good things. I want to stick with the literacy thing for a second. And I want to start with the community partners, because we are doing that with the New Worlds Reading Initiative. But I'll tell you what put a fine point on it for me. There was this random news story, local news, and it was about this guy, Antonio Brown, and he has a barbershop book club in St. Petersburg. Look it up, Antonio Brown, Barbershop Book Club, St. Petersburg. And he's got a small business, barbershop, and he's got a library of donated books. And kids come in for the haircut, and they got to read to them while they're in the chair. And every so often, he's like, if you read this book, because it's a little bit harder than the last one you did, he helps them through it, works them through it, and they get a free haircut. He's got a little chess club that he started. And they come in and they read. And I went down there and I kind of brought my box of books as like permission to sit there for 2 hours and ask him questions. And I just said, tell me why this works. Like, why is it that kids are excited to come in here and have you do that? Why don't they just say, no, I don't want to? And he says, you know, a lot of the kids who come into my barber shop have never met a man who owned a business. I got to teach them about entrepreneurship. I got to give them a book. A lot of them have never been given a book before. They don't have a book in their home. Some of them never had the opportunity to have someone to sit down and read with them before. I get to do that with them and get to be part of it. And then I said to him, you know, let's assume we could put together a program, like what do we need to do to like make this important for community leaders, for parents? And he said, that's really easy, lots of propaganda, right? And he's right, but from that bottom-up experience from Antonio Brown's Barbershop Book Club came the New World's Reading Initiative. And you know, one day Richard and I were talking, and we're talking about how we're doing in reading, and the stats you mentioned. You know, the one that's always kind of the most, the two biggest for me are always the 88% of kids who don't graduate from high school, struggling readers in third grade. Like, if I knew no other ones than that, that would be enough. But then we had this conversation because we've been doing well in reading in Florida. So we said, if we did nothing different, how long would it take us to get to like real reading proficiency with kids? 250 years. None of us are willing to do that. So now comes the New World's Reading Initiative, right? So, Mr. Fair, we get yes, we want the kid to have a book in their home. That's reading appropriate. It gets there. We have to communicate with the parents. So the Lassinger Center at the University of Florida, which, by the way, as a lawmaker, and the lawmakers in the room will appreciate this, every time we do something, we have this great idea, and in our minds, it's going to be awesome, and then we see the implementation, and we're super disappointed, right? This happens all the time. The Lassinger Center at the University of Florida, what they are doing in the New World's Reading Initiative is the first time I have looked at something and said, that is way better than we ever could have dreamed of. Way better than we ever could have dreamed of. They are going to have books come December arriving at Children's Home. We have 75,000 kids who are signed up. We have as many as 500,000 struggling readers in the state. They're going to be communicating directly with their parents to make sure they have high quality content to help their parent who might be a struggling reader, right? To be able to engage with their kids, make it sexy, have celebrities who are doing videos, getting them excited, engaging with community partners like Antonio Brown, who we might not ordinarily have contact with through the system and the bureaucracy to say, hey, you got something dialed in and figured out. How do we enhance what you're doing and support what you're doing so that we can sit back 20 years from now and say, we made a difference in children's lives because they learned to read. And because they learned to read, everything in their life became possible.
Incite the whole village. In our We Read program, we bind up every billboard in Liberty City. And we're using the children who are reading, who have excelled. We're using families who are reading. When I see my neighbor on a billboard, just because he or she is involved in reading to their child, I create another kind of respect for reading. I excite me because I want to be on the billboard. And in the process of wanting to be on the billboard, I also deliver something that makes sense to the future of my child. Yeah. When you involve the total community in the execution, then the reading deficit goes away. It won't be by special programs. It is a special program that ignites the importance of reading. And then we move beyond the ignition to reality. And we can do that. That's why when we pass the laws, it is incumbent upon us to involve every institution that touches that child in making sure that they understand the importance of reading. When reading becomes sexy in the neighborhood, when I am looked up to as something special because I can read, not because I got on some Nikes, then it catches fire. So the challenge for us is not to just pass the law, but make sure that they catch fire.
Yeah, we can't understate the importance of reading, especially that K through 3, as you talked about, and which happens to be the exact range where all of my children are right now. And I have one child who is like a great reader. My wife did a tremendous amount of work getting them started early, before preschool. But one of my children, who's in third grade, still struggles to read with fluency. And I don't know if this is making it sexy for him, but I made a commitment to him that I would get up a little bit earlier every morning and just read 5 minutes with him and have him read to me, and then I would read to him, just make it like a father-son thing. Sorry, I actually didn't plan on sharing that or getting emotional, but what struck me, though, is through that experience, I thought it was going to be a really big challenge because it's getting up early, and he doesn't love reading, but he loves reading with me, and that makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I just want to get it.
He loves you.
Yes, I want to get us to the point where our schools are getting away from that whole language and the balanced approach and get more into the science of reading. I've literally fought with my school, not fought, but I've raised it with my schools and asked them why I asked them what they were teaching, and I got 3 different answers from 3 different people. And then I pinned somebody down, and I was like, look, this is what I heard from my kid's teacher, this is what I heard from the assistant principal, and this is what I heard from you during that one meeting or whatever. And so I pinned them down, and they kind of confessed that they do sort of leave it open to teachers and that it is more of this balanced approach. But I'm like kind of, after listening to Emily Hanford's Hard Words, and I'm sure many of us are familiar with that, I just don't know why are we still not there yet? This one's for the commissioner, and I wasn't planning to ask you this, and so I'm sorry for a surprise question here, but since we're talking about literacy, this is one that's near and dear to my heart. Why are we still having a hard time getting the science of reading taught in our schools?
Because it still exists everywhere. I'm given a number I have no backing on, but I would bet that if you were to go to any school in any state in America, I would bet somewhere in the ballpark of 70% or more still doing some sort of balanced literacy. And that's an imbalance. When I say balanced literacy, there's no balance. It's mostly cueing and whole language.
Yes.
And so, but it's because the whole ecosystem is there. If I sent my daughter tomorrow to go to a college of education, odds are she's going to be taught by a professor who's teaching whole language and how to teach kids how to read with cueing. So it's just everywhere. And all these things that I'm talking about, it's not going to happen. This is like a 20-year fight. But we can see immediate success. If we do it right, and to Chris's point, we've basically flatlined. We do our 3rd grade assessment, and we've been in the high 50s for a decade. You see the same thing with NAEP. And that's where Chris gets the number. If we were to continue at the current growth rates, how long would it take us to get to all kids being 90+% literate? And it's 250 years. And so it's just not acceptable. But we can see it if we do all these things and we involve the community and we have all these initiatives and we fix the instruction, and it's not pre-K. I'm telling you, it's school readiness. We got to start at the very, very beginning. And we do that, I think you're going to see immediate impacts. That the 57 or 56% in 3rd grade reading becomes 60, becomes 62, and we know we're on the right track. And we're on, but it's not. This is a 25-year fight.
So, what does that 25-year fight look like? What things need to happen? And this isn't just for Florida folks. I mean, all of you can think about this too, but I'd like to hear your opinions and share with the audience what you think. What specific things need to happen over the next 25 years so that students can continue to progress in their education?
The first dollar spent in every single state until we reach success should be in getting kids from birth to 3rd grade on grade level. And then after that, we do whatever else we can with those dollars. It has to be all in. We're at Vegas, we're at a table, we got to put all our chips in on early learning.
Amen.
I'll also add a little bit at a higher level, realizing this is a lot of policymakers. You have to be willing to take a little bit of a risk. Not everything's going to be perfect, and you're going to hear how everything's going to not work and how all the problems with it and how we don't know exactly the right reading program or exactly the right metric or exactly the right. When Speaker was coming out with the New World Initiative, that was something that he had generated in conversation. We in the Senate weren't real sure what it was, honestly. Going through the process, we had had a couple of conversations, but we knew the passion, and we knew what we were trying to do, knew what he was trying to do, so we went all in to go ahead and start down that path. We will come back and fix the things that might not have been perfect in some of these things we've done, but you've got to get it out there, and you've got to start moving down that path. If not, you will stay in analysis paralysis forever, and you will never get anything done.
I think you have to ignore the naysayers and be bold. And when you reach a decision, move on it. Don't analyze it or continue to procrastinate, but move on it. Be bold and have the understanding that there's going to be resistance, that there's going to be people out there that are naysayers, that are going to be against you, and they want to keep the status quo. But you have to break through that. And in order to do that, you have to have a team, and you have to get people to follow you.
Indeed. Any other thoughts?
Yeah,
The next 25 years, like what's it going to take?
Yeah, look, I think for us, I'm going to think of this like I'm not a Floridian for a second, right? Because we really are super spoiled. You know, we had Jeb Bush was governor, and we can sit here and we can talk about school choice and we can do all these things. The reality is, I remember growing up in Pinellas County in Clearwater, which, by the way, is one of the leaders in the state now of having opportunities in school choice. But back then, when Jeb Bush was governor, this was wildly controversial. People were freaking out, fighting hard. Now we go up in a charter school, most communities are like, oh yeah, absolutely, we love that. But it wasn't like that back then. You know, I remember Chris Laval is a good friend of mine. He's our education chair in the House. We had this conversation as we were coming in about how when we were growing up, you know, there were legislators in Pinellas County who shied away from what Governor Bush was doing because they were afraid of political retribution. Now in Pinellas County, you stand before a group of parents and tell them you don't want charter schools. Good luck. Good luck surviving that, right? Because now we have hit critical mass. So what I would say to you is, you know, I was having another conversation with another elected leader here, and we were talking about this issue that's in his legislature. And he was saying, look, I got to look out, and we all do, right? We have to look out for our members, the people we serve with. And it might not be worth losing an election over something that nobody cares about. Why would you do that to your people you serve with? But let's talk about education. If you gave, like we did last year, another 1.6 million kids an opportunity to go to the school that their parents or thinks are best for them, or the creation of a corporate tax credit scholarship to allow poor children $150,000 a year to go to the private school of their choice when they never would have had that opportunity before, or you open up thousands of charter schools throughout the state to give diverse options, is that worth losing an election over? If that's not worth losing an election over, then I don't know what is. That is the fight of our time. It is the fight of our generation.
On every Tuesday evening, I do a podcast on Facebook and on YouTube. And I open up by saying, if you want the rest of your life to be the best of your life, then you've got to live the rest of your life like colored people live the worst of their life. When we make sure that we understand that it ain't racism, it's a lack of believing that we can achieve. That when we tell the children that in spite of your circumstances, if I can be sitting here on this stage with all of this august body, all of these great white people, it would seem to me that you can achieve. So I've got to make sure that my children believe that the laws that you pass can be actualized. And they're going to believe in me, not in your law. And if I tell them that reading is important, then they will read. You can pass the law all day long. But if I don't believe that reading is important, then the scores are not going to go up. So as you pass the law, I've got to convince the adults to whom the children belong that they've got to do their part to make sure that we move the needle. So passing the law and not mobilizing and not holding the foot to the fire of the parents to whom the children belong will not work. So I'm hoping that one thing that comes out of this conversation is that if you pass the law and don't involve me, you should not have passed the law anyway.
Yep. So I appreciate all the responses to this. I heard, just to kind of recap here, we got to believe that you can achieve. And I think that applies not just to parents and communities and like the adults as we play roles in individual children's lives, but as leadership too. I think that belief needs to exist, that these things are possible. I appreciated the comment about being willing to lose an election, like stand for what you believe in and really stand up. And I know that sometimes people lose when they stand up for what they believe in, but you know, at the end of the day, you got to face yourself in the mirror. And I appreciated the comments about ignoring the naysayers, taking risks, and putting all the chips in. But one thing that struck me, this wasn't what you said exactly, but I think it was you, Senator Stargel, but it's kind of what I extrapolated out of that, is that we need to be able to picture a future. Oh no, it was Speaker, I'm sorry. We need to be able to picture a future where these things that are so controversial become normal and accepted. We need to imagine a future of the thing we're trying to get done that may be controversial now, that maybe in 10 years from now, it will be like the most obvious thing in the world that we should have been doing all along. And I think that if we commit ourselves in whatever role that we're in to trying to achieve good things for children and keeping in sight like who this is for, we can avoid that fatigue and we keep pushing. And it's not just, Patricia's always said this, we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We can't just think, oh, well, we did one thing this year, and that's great. If you look up at this stage, the things we did in this past year, each one of those things could have been one thing that everybody would have looked at and said, man, we did good. That was hard in a pandemic year, and we got that done. But yet we had like 4 or 5 things with the workforce legislation, the expansion on private school choice, expansion on charter schools to get universities to become charter authorizers, and the things we did with home remote learning and also in-school learning, like all these things that we did in 1 year. And reading, geez, yes, I probably forgot a lot of things, actually. There's probably more. But that's the point, is that you don't have to settle for just like getting one thing through and maybe just like 1 year at a time or like 1 year and then wait a few years. You don't need to take breaks. We can keep pushing this work forward year after year, and our children demand it. Thank you. Let's give a warm round of applause.
Thank you.